Welcome to today's webinar, which will cover how to implement the Low-Income Household Water Assistance Program LIHWAP without written vendor agreements. In order to ensure that LIHWAP is serving households equitably across the country, OCS would like to provide examples on how to serve households where there is not a formal written agreement with their water service provider. By the end of today's webinar, you should be able to answer the following questions. What are vendor agreements? What LIHWAP terms and conditions must be met in the absence of a formal written vendor agreement? And lastly, what are some promising practices when working without a vendor agreement? First, we will review what vendor agreements are. The authorizing language for LIHWAP requires that benefit payments go directly to the water service provider on behalf of the eligible household. Vendor agreements are agreements between the LIHWAP grant recipient or subrecipient and the water service provider, who ultimately receives the LIHWAP funding. The Office of Community Services, OCS, strongly encourages the use of vendor agreements between water service providers and the LIHWAP administrating agency prior to payments being made on behalf of eligible households. Vendor agreements identify specific requirements for interaction between the grant recipient and the water service provider and outlines the terms and conditions for receiving LIHWAP benefits on behalf of households. Vendor agreements ensure consumer protections and reduce liability to all participating parties. For more information on vendor agreements, please refer to the information memorandum titled LIHWAP IM 2021-02 Vendor Agreement FY 2021 on the LIHWAP website under Policy and Guidance. While the use of vendor agreements is highly recommended as a LIHWAP best practices, they are not required by the LIHWAP terms and conditions. In the absence of a vendor agreement, it is incumbent on the grant recipient to ensure compliance with the following LIHWAP terms and conditions. First, notify or require the owner or operator to notify each participating household of the amount of assistance paid on its behalf. Next, ensure that the owner or operator will charge the eligible household in the normal billing process. The difference between the actual amount due and the amount of the payment made by the LIHWAP grant. Next, ensure that any agreement with an owner or operator contains provisions to ensure that no household receiving LIHWAP assistance will be treated adversely because of such assistance under applicable provisions of state, territorial, or tribal law or public regulatory requirements. And lastly, ensure that the provision of payments to the owner or operator remains at the option of the grant recipient in consultation with local subrecipients and ensures that the owner or operator provides written reconciliation and confirmation on a regular basis that benefits have been credited appropriately to households and that services have been restored on a timely basis or disconnection status has been removed if applicable. The LIHWAP terms and conditions document is hyperlinked in the slide title. In the absence of a vendor agreement, LIHWAP grant recipients must verify that the eligible household account has been credited in the amount of the benefit payment that was received. This can be confirmed through a regular statement for the household account or through confirmation of payments by the LIHWAP administrating agency. The following are promising practices that, when combined, may prove useful in ensuring compliance with the LIHWAP terms and conditions. 1. Share the LIHWAP terms and conditions. 2. Conduct follow-up monitoring. 3. Maintain written records. And 4. Educate households on their rights under the program. The first promising practice is to share the LIHWAP terms and conditions with the water vendor. When sharing the terms and conditions, include a notice that states that by accepting payment on behalf of a household, the water service provider is agreeing to the LIHWAP terms and conditions. The LIHWAP terms and conditions can be found on the LIHWAP webpage under Policy and Guidance, Dear Colleague Letter from June 2nd, 2021. The next promising practice in the absence of a written vendor agreement is to implement strong monitoring practices. Grant recipients should conduct follow-up monitoring for each benefit payment made. Consider using a dual monitoring system by following up with both the water service provider and the household to ensure that the account was credited and that an active water connection remains. Follow-up monitoring can be conducted by reports, emails, letter, phone calls, or other mutually agreed upon methods with the water service provider. Monitoring can be a shared cloud-based spreadsheet to confirm correct credited accounts. This monitoring needs to be conducted for every payment, but as best practice can be completed on a set schedule, at least quarterly. Another best practice in the absence of written vendor agreements is to maintain written records. Written records should include the date of service, benefit amount, household account number, and the water service provider's representative's name. For example, a spreadsheet with account numbers and payment amounts can be created and verbally or electronically confirmed on a regular basis by the water service provider as described above. Another best practice in the absence of written vendor agreements is to educate households on their rights under the program and provide them an avenue for complaint in the event the household is denied the benefit or adversely treated due to participation in this program. This can be done the same time the household is notified of approval or denial of LIHWAP benefits. The promising practices that we just reviewed are only effective when done in practice together. To help visualize, here is an example from a LIHWAP administrating agency. This particular LIHWAP administrating agency was working with multiple water vendors across their service area. While they had many signed vendor agreements, they received multiple LIHWAP applications from households that were being served by a water service provider not participating in the program. When the agency approached this small water service provider, they were reluctant to enter into a vendor agreement. The LIHWAP administrating agency shared that they have eligible households being served by the vendor and were prepared to pay off their outstanding balance. Despite the incentive to increase revenue, the time and labor it would take to enter into an agreement was too burdensome for the small water provider. As a result, the LIHWAP administrating agency decided to proceed with payment without a signed water vendor agreement in place. The agency sent the water service provider the names, account numbers, and benefit amounts for each eligible household along with a check. They also sent the LIHWAP terms and conditions and a notice that read, "By accepting this payment, you are agreeing to the LIHWAP terms and conditions." When the water service provider cashed the check, the LIHWAP administrating agency conducted dual monitoring by following up with the water service provider to confirm payment to the appropriate household accounts and called the households to confirm they had an active water connection. These communication efforts were documented in a cloud-based spreadsheet. Throughout the LIHWAP application and payment process, the LIHWAP administrating agency educated households on their right under the program and ensured open lines of communication with potential applicants and eligible households. At one point, when a household received an incorrect benefit amount, the household knew the avenue to file complaint and get the appropriate amount credited. This information was shared with them on the application, on the acceptance letter, and was publicly available on the LIHWAP administrating agency's website. This concludes the LIHWAP webinar on LIHWAP implementation without written vendor agreement. By attending this webinar, hopefully you understand the purpose of vendor agreements, the required LIHWAP terms and conditions that must be met in the absence of formal written vendor agreements, and lastly, we hope you walk away with some helpful practices for implementing LIHWAP without vendor agreements. As always, if you have any questions about the contents of this presentation, please reach out to your assigned program specialist. Thank you for watching this webinar.